Talmud relates that Pharaoh had three advisors. Bilaam, the one who ultimately was hired to curse the Jewish people, blessed them, but then gave advice that ultimately caused a tremendous plague amongst the Jewish people, a great sin amongst the Jewish people. Then there was Job, the one, of course, who has a famous book that's written about him and named after him, the one that we read about how we deal with suffering, even when we think the person doesn't deserve it. And then Jethro, Yisro, the father-in-law of Moses. And before it came to his problem with the Jewish people, he came to them and says, we have a Jewish problem. These people are multiplying in crazy numbers, and they're soon going to be so much more than us that they're going to kick us out of Egypt. What should we do about them? Bilaam gave advice. Their children, their boys, should be thrown into the river. Job didn't say anything. He was quiet. Jethro said, no way, you can't do that. He spoke positively about the Jewish people. What happened? Bilaam became the main advisor of Pharaoh. Jethro had to run away. And ultimately what happened is that Bilaam was killed by the Jewish people, by the sword. Job went through suffering that is expressed in the book of Job. And Jethro, it says, from his children, they populated the Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin were children, grandchildren, that is, of Jethro. So the Rebbe takes this story and he dissects it. And he asks, firstly, with regards to Bilaam. Bilaam is an advisor to Pharaoh, and he has to look after the well-being of Egypt. If there is a foreign population that you're afraid is going to be a fifth column, he has an obligation to advise against them, to say what he said. Why do we have a complaint against them? Which the Rebbe answers that to speak against the Jewish people is not only bad for the Jewish people, it's bad for the Egyptians, because the Jewish people are the apple of God's eye. And it only came out of anti-Semitism, out of hatred, out of jealousy, that he spoke against the Jewish people. And that's why he is guilty of this terrible act. But then the Rebbe asks about Job. Why are we upset only about his being quiet? We should be upset that he didn't say to save the Jewish people, because if he did, it would have been 2 against 1. Him and Jethro against Bilaam. They would have helped. The fact that he was quiet made it Bilaam against Jethro, and being that Pharaoh was predisposed to hating on the Jews, of course he'd go with Bilaam. So the fact that he didn't positively speak about the Jewish people actually caused tremendous suffering for the Jewish people. Shouldn't he be guilty for that? Not just in the fact that he was silent. And the Rebbe's response to that is that when you are an advisor and your role is to speak up and speak out for the sake of the benefit of the country, and we already said the benefit of Egypt would have been the well-being of the Jewish people, then your guilt is associated with the fact that you're quiet. Why are you quiet? Because the next day, as the Rebbe put it, you want to be okay with Bilaam and Pharaoh, you want to be okay with Moses, you want to be okay with everyone. So you say, I didn't say anything. I'm not saying anything. Why you say I'm not saying anything? Because you don't want to get involved. Why don't you want to get involved? Because you want to play both sides. You want to be okay with everybody. Says the Rebbe, if your task is to be an advisor, you have to talk. That's your role. You can't be quiet just to be good with everybody. Especially as a result of that, the suffering upon the Jewish people came because you didn't speak up. You were quiet. So that teaches us that the people in a position of influence must speak up and speak out. And they cannot say, you know what, if I'm going to speak up, I'm not going to be able to have a positive influence in other ways, so I'll be quiet. And this we learn also from Jethro. Yisro, the question you could ask on Yisro is this: why wasn't he more pragmatic? The reality is, he was the third to speak. Bilaam already gave his negative position. Eov was quiet. If Jethro speaks up positively for the Jews, it's still 1 against 1, and Pharaoh is certainly going to side with Bilaam. So he has achieved nothing. As a matter of fact, achieving nothing actually could harm the Jewish people. Why? Because even with the decree that the boys should be thrown into the Nile, the decree concludes, but the girl should live. So shouldn't you be still in the palace and be an advisor so you could help the girls that live? So you can help the families? What's the point of you speaking out and speaking up when you know it's not going to help anyway? When you're therefore going to lose your voice, you're not going to be able to do things for the girls. Says the Rebbe, the lesson here is that Jethro says that that's not a calculation. If it's talking about a decree of all the boys thrown into the Nile, you cannot say, you know what, I'm going to give up on the boys so that I could save the girls. You can't say that. Can a man says, let the boys be thrown into the Nile? You have to speak up and speak out. It's not going to help. But if your job is to be an advisor, you have to advise for good. You can't just be quiet. And the Rebbe then goes on to say that this is true in all times. When we have a position, when you have a role, you cannot say for the sake of benefit of a minority, I'm going to allow another section, another group to be thrown under the bus. Even if they'll be thrown under the bus anyway without me. You have to stand up. That's a lesson for all of us. We have to speak out, speak truth to power, like Yisro did, even if it meant you had to run away. Because that's the position you have to be in. And only then do you have children that are in the Sanhedrin. They remain in the Sanhedrin because you spoke up and you spoke out. I've been speaking up over this past period. The Prime Minister did apologize yesterday, but let's take this deeper. What did he apologize for? I don't know. He didn't say. Apologize for not securing the Jews. What should he have done? What should have done happened differently? When one apologizes, does tshuva, one has to recognize what the problem is so that you could have a solution. If you don't recognize the problem, even if you're sorry, there's no solution. So how do you make sure it doesn't happen again? So what's the problem? The problem there wasn't enough security? Okay, that was a problem. Is that what the apology was? Or is there something much deeper? Is it a position where you took a stance against Israel, which is the collective Jew, and which, even if that was not your intention, is certainly the way it's taken by other anti-Semites, that terror works. October 7th brings a Palestinian state. Terror actually achieves things for the terrorists. That's what they hear. And when they hear that I'm not with the Jews, I'm not with the collective Jewish state, means I'm not with the Jews. Whether that's your intention or not is not relevant. That's where we need to have a rectification. That's where there needs to be a speaking up in support of the collective Jew, which is the Jewish land. That's when we know that there'll be a transformation and there'll be a change. Good Shabbos.